All right, guys, how you doing? Happy Sunday. We are live. Give it a couple of minutes, as always, for people to join the channel. Make sure my audio is good. So if you are watching today and the audio is okay, just let me know real fast before we move on, and then we're going to get going. And excellent. Rick, welcome to the video today. Nice to see you from Tracy. We're going to be talking about the Schielhau today in particular. So any questions you might have, they're going to come up. If this is your first time watching one of my live streams, we do both live stream, and I also have some pre-recorded material that we filmed yesterday when I had a couple of people that might have broken quarantine to come help me out, put it together. So in between the live sections, when it's running the pre-recorded material, just let me know any questions you have in the chat. I'll answer them there if it's nice and easy. And otherwise, we will go ahead and, when we come back from the pre-recorded video, do a question and answer section for you before moving on to the next bit. But as it says over here on my left, today's material, we're going to start off with a discussion of the Schielhau, and we're specifically going to be looking at kind of the theoretical underpinnings of it. Now, this is not going to be really deep into it. This initial video is intended as something for, people that are relatively new to historical European martial arts, as a kind of beginning fencer that may be struggling with the Schielhau. But during it, if you do have any questions, please go ahead and type them in chat, and I'll grab my sword and we can definitely delve into those a little more deeply than the video itself will initially cover. But otherwise, looks like my audio is good and everything's running nicely on both Facebook and YouTube, depending on where you're watching from today. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started with our discussion of the Schielhau. As always, guys, at any point, if you have any questions, type them in. Also, one of the beautiful things here is you can always hit pause and come back to it later, and we'll get on that as well. But I'm going to get started, and without further ado, hi, guys. In today's material, we're going to be talking about the Schielhau. So let's discuss it first from just a purely theoretical kind of point of view. One of the Meisterhau, the Schielhau, is primarily used against people that are standing in a low point-forward guard, whether that's going to be in Flug or in Longort. That's kind of what we're looking for with this particular cut. Now, it can be used in a couple of different kind of situations. It can be used both to safely attack someone standing in those guards or defend against someone as they leave those guards. So when we're in those point-forward guards, or rather when we find someone standing in those point-forward guards, our first thought immediately goes to the Schielhau. Now, it is an attack that's going to penetrate to the person's center. And so one of the things that we're especially going to be looking for anytime that we're coming straight in is that initial contact with their blade, where ideally we're going to get the weak of their blade on the strong of our blade. That's going to give us the ability to control them and work to their opening without them having an easy time actually setting our point aside and turning our attack into a miss. So with that, when we're looking at the Schielhau and we're going to be going for the bind, one of the most important things that we're looking for is finding it appropriately. Now, initially, a big mistake we can make is to target the Schielhau so that it comes straight down on an opponent's head. Rather, we want to pay attention to where their sword is, which side of their body, and then target the shoulder of that side. So if their sword is on their right, we're going to target the right shoulder. If the sword is being held on the left, then the initial strike will target the line of their left shoulder. There can be a slight angle as we do this, a fairly steep, it is an Oberhau, so something that's coming in close to 90 degrees, maybe 15 degrees off either side is acceptable, but not 45 or more. So let's take a look at the cut itself and see the line that it's going to follow, where it's going to start from, and where it's going to end. Now, the Schielhau can be done from a variety of different initial postures, but because it is an Oberhau, one of the best places when you're first learning to do it is from the Oberhut. So we're going to start out in a nice high guard, and the idea that we're going to want to do is to just throw this cut as an Oberhau, but with the short edge. So the first action actually is to start to twist the sword in the hand, kind of turning the flat towards the opponent. This then, combined with a hip turn and extension of the arm, will bring the short edge into alignment, and it will fall down through our opponent's shoulder. Now, I'm going to try and keep my wrist from breaking too much. I do not want a heavy break one way or the other. I want a nice solid form at the point of contact. Then, once I've impacted my opponent's sword, whether it's because they're standing in a guard or they're attacking in, then and only then will I take my step, which will typically be off to the side and either press down into a extended hanger of Flug, or will come up and strike up through Ox, targeting the head. One of the things that you'll find difficult about this cut, especially when wearing modern sparring gloves, is actually managing to turn the sword appropriately in the hand. A lot of times we don't have that extra dexterity, and so we try and compensate for it by breaking our wrist. That's going to compromise our structure and lead to a really poor cut, and not something that's going to be able to control the opponent's blade the way that we want it to. All right, guys. Let's take a look now at doing the Schielhau versus an opponent and see what we're looking at. We've got a second camera going on as well so that you'll be able to see this from multiple angles and have a good idea of what I'm saying. Okay. All right, so I've got my opponent standing in Longort, and I want to lay siege to his strong parry position and get in safely. So I might decide to do that by attacking through the Schielhau. Starting out up in a high Vomtog position, the first thing I'm going to want to do is get that turn of the hand, the turn of the hip, extend out into my own pseudo long point. Once I've engaged his blade, then I can step forward and, feeling pressure from where he's going, either driving down or driving up, to attack. So strike in and step. And step. Now, it's really important that I do not take my step until I feel his blade, because if I go for the strike and I miss his blade and I step in, I'm dead. Which leads us to another really important point on this cut. I am not targeting his sword. I am targeting, in this case, his right shoulder. Okay? My attack is going to come down through that right shoulder from my perspective, so that I'll strike in along it. That'll engage his blade and allow me to get in there safely. If I pay attention to the point of his sword and I try and strike at it, I'm going to miss. I'll come in at the wrong angle. It's just a matter of geometry and the human body not working out that way. So instead, I'm going to focus on that right shoulder and launch my attack straight in. Now, that's if he's standing in the Longort. What if he's standing in a different position? For that, let's have him start in Flug. Okay? Well, for Flug, it's the same thing. I'm going to bring in my attack, and most likely what's going to happen is he's going to want to extend out towards Longort as I start to launch my attack in to defend himself. And I'm fine. Now, he might try to do something else. He might decide to do any other action from there, in which case he's not coming right at me. There, he deviated to the side to gain a stronger parry, so we'll just change off and strike around to the other side, targeting the left shoulder this time. If he decides to change through and do a disengage, right, do a Durchwechsel as I come in, then I just turn my long edge back into it and immediately go from there. The thing that I'm looking for is that blade contact. I know if I have good form that I will come down on the inside of his blade. If I don't immediately feel it, I don't wait to think about what he's doing. I turn the long edge back around. If I don't feel contact, long edge comes out, and I continue to press. If I don't do that, if I decide to strike and he changes, and I try and use the short edge, now I'm going to try and push off to the side. Now I'm no longer threatening him, and we run into a situation where I take a pommel strike right to the face. Not a lot of fun. Okay? The last thing we want to look at for this is using it against an attack. What happens if he launches his strike coming in? Now, we can use the Schielhau against two sets of positions fairly safely. Anything coming from his outside quadrant, well, I guess technically his inside quadrant, depending on how we want to look at it, but not from the center. So if he's in Ox or if he's in Flug, and any Ox position, if he's in the opening of Ox, that's going to be fine. So if he attacks from that side, I can take my Schielhau to parry, and if it's a high one, I might go up and finish with the strike to the head. Right, we'll catch, nice and strong,
stab him in the throat. If he comes in with that attack from below, so the last one that we got to worry about then is going to be that attack coming out of the lower openings, right? Especially a flug-like position. For that one, we might actually even find as it comes in as a thrust that just getting down there in time can be difficult. So we may even find on that one that we may need to step back with it to gain the action and then step in, okay? A thrust from below, when we're point up in the air, it's a much shorter distance that that point has to travel to reach me. And if I just stay in place, I may not get there in time, right? This is very late. I didn't gain control. That's through me. Jeff is being very, very nice to me. If he wasn't being nice to me, it'd be through my face. So in that kind of situation, the answer is that we need to gain distance. Now, if I end up completely weak on strong at this point, I'm not going to dominate this bind, but depending on what he decides to do, we can find an option that's acceptable. Yeah. So when that attack comes in, we need to create distance, either with a back step or some kind of motion to create the space, and then and only then moving in. We could also do it with a step away for that same reason, to create the distance. But that threat from so low is really, really dangerous. If he's in a higher position, the distance we both have to travel makes this much more effective. And so I can just strike straight in, take his hands and his throat. We'll talk about that relative distance that the swords have to travel in a future video. So for right now, guys, hopefully these kind of discussions of the Schielhau have helped you understand it a little bit better. But if you do have any questions, throw them in the chat, and I'll be answering them for you in just a moment. But otherwise, guys, in a moment we're going to move on to looking at now how to use the Schielhau in a technical drilling standpoint, right after I answer your questions.
All right. So, we are back, and I do have a question. Let me see here. Yeah, so a question that did come up in it, and I answered in the process, was, you know, when you're dealing with a low thrust, pardon me, my daughter is feeling especially loud this morning. This is why part of the video is always done whenever possible as a non-live stream. So anyway, the question that did come up, and it was answered in the video, but to just go over it again, is should you step offline rather than stepping back? Absolutely. Stepping back will create distance and therefore time. You okay?
Okay.
Pardon me 1 second, guys. Nearly killing herself. Anyway, so stepping offline, right, is an excellent choice. By stepping back, we create distance and time, but it does set us in a position where we can't necessarily respond as quickly or as easily. So for that reason, a lot of times when we want to excuse me, very difficult to do with the baby. It's very difficult. Let's try that one more time. Stepping offline will create time for us and leave us in a position where we can actually respond in time, whereas stepping back creates time but doesn't leave us in a position where we can respond as easily. Yeah, so I think as a rule, to follow up on that question, generally stepping to the side is going to be our better option, especially when dealing with those threats from below. It's not going to keep the opponent's point in line on us the same way that stepping back will, and it'll give us an ability to respond more rapidly than a pure backward step will. And yeah, so excellent question from YouTube on that one, and we'll go on from there. And I think my daughter's finally deciding to calm down a little bit, which of course will be right then as we move on to the next portion of the video. So, in the next video, what we're going to watch is kind of taking this theoretical application of the Schielhau and turning it into a way to train it and ultimately run it as a drill. I was fortunate enough to have a partner to practice with for this video, which I understand for a lot of us is not going to be available at the moment. But if you are fortunate enough to have someone that can even just hold the sword for you, they don't even have to know how to fence. If they can hold a sword out in front of them in a long point-like position, that's enough to be a good training partner with the Schielhau and what we're going to be working. I would recommend putting a mask on their head, gloves on their hands, as those are going to be two areas that are likely to be impacted when working this particular drill. If you don't have that, though, a Pell like the one I have behind me that has, an ability to hold a sword in a point forward position will allow you to practice as well, even if not quite as nicely as a live partner will. So I don't see any other questions at the moment. I'm going to go ahead and roll the next one. As always, guys, if you have any questions as we go along, type them in or save them for the end, and I will happily answer them as we go. So let's take a look at that.
All right, guys, for our technical drill today, we're going to be using the Schielhau from both sides. And to learn it better, we found that actually starting the action from a bind and learning it that way tends to make it a little bit easier to understand what you're doing, even though we're going to be using the cut ultimately in the drill itself as a full cut. So, to begin, I'll have Jeff stand in long point, grado versetza, anything point forward, doesn't matter. And we'll come in and we'll establish our initial bind as though we've struck in or otherwise come into this position. So from here, the first thing that I want to do is I'm going to rotate the sword, not breaking my wrist, but actually allowing the sword to pivot in my open front hand to turn the short edge against Jeff's sword, okay? That initial wind in is going to cause his sword to deviate to the side, opening up my line to now launch a strike at his arm or his shoulder with a step. As we go. Okay. And so we get it. Relatively easy. We can do the same thing from the other side by simply, in this case, turning the short edge in and then launching the attack, right? So we're in the bind, we turn the short edge, and we launch. And now we're in Meyer's new Schielhau position, okay? So that's where you're going to want to start if you have a partner or a Pell that can allow a sword to be held against it so that you can start that action. So we'll get the wind, and then the step and the strike. Once you feel comfortable with that basic action, then you're going to need to actually strike in with that, okay? So again, if he's still in long point, same as we did before, we'd first strike in with the long edge, turn, and strike. Strike, turn, and through. Strike, turn, and through. And then remove the initial long edge strike and just turn it into a straight short edge to his sword. So that the turn actually starts before contact is made and we're allowing ourselves to finish strongly. Okay? So that's kind of going to be the way that we want to do that. First in the bind, then striking to the bind and finally winding before the strike to the bind. Now we're going to do a drill where we're going to do 3 sets of 1 minute each, and the way that this is going to work out is Jeff is going to come forward into the long point. He's just going to extend the sword into the long point, in which case I will strike. Depending on which foot is forward and where I'm at, I might find it more comfortable to do one side or the other in my initial strike as it comes, as we come in and go from there. So 3 1-minute sets of that, 30-second rest in between. We'll get started in just a moment. I'll go ahead and throw a timer up on the screen now. So we got a timer set down below, and we're going to get started. All right, 30 seconds, guys. So if you're doing this by yourself, just have a pel set up and you can strike to one side repeatedly, imagining that the thrust is coming. In the next set, we're going to do a winging up from below. So a short edge strike is going to come up from below. That's what I'm going to respond to. If you miss your timing on it, step back, let it go by. Don't feel the need to attack into each one if you can't. Look down. Crumpet. All right, in the last set, Jeff is going to be alternating off. Sometimes he's going to come forward with a thrust, other times he's going to come forward with a cut. I'll have to respond appropriately. Give it a couple of seconds, shake it out, guys, and then we'll move on. All right, get ready. We're going to get started in just a second. Here we go. You okay?
Yep.
Do not stab your partner in the throat. It is frowned upon. You might sometimes find that trying to get that new Schielhau in there can be really difficult. It sometimes ends up as a crump, which is fine because it's a crump, just with alternating footwork. So do your best, try and land it. But an important thing, guys, if you mess one up, don't worry about it. Keep moving. All right, that's our 3 sets, 1 minute each.
All right, guys, and we're back. So, one of the questions that came up, well, yeah, Peter had an excellent point there in YouTube. That yeah, the throat is absolutely where you want to stab someone if your intent is to kill them. But when working with your training partners, as always, guys, we only have so many to go around, especially in a time like right now. We don't want to kill our training partners. Then we don't have any more training partners. But if it's somebody you really didn't like, yeah, stab them in the throat. It's my personal preference. One of the questions, though, that came up that I saw asked was, Meyer mentions 3 types of squinters. Now, in this video, we only went over 2 of them, the uncrossed and crossed arm versions that he lists, which are really done to the left side or the right side. The 3rd squinter is one that's always really kind of difficult in a lot of ways for people to understand and to kind of work with, and it's, you know, the whole idea of the squinter with the face. Now, I think actually this ties into some of the stuff that we've been covering in our videos, the Quarantine Thoughts playlist on our YouTube channel. If you haven't watched it, you know, go take a look. And one of the discussions that's been ongoing kind of in there is a question of time and space and, you know, provoking, taking, hitting, all of these kind of things. And so in particular, the 3rd squinter of the face, is a provoker with the body. The way that Meyer describes it, notably in the 3rd part of the long sword in 1570, is that you've risen up into, you know, the guard of the day, and then you act as though you're going to be, you know, cutting a Schielhau at the person and letting it run past on their left, and then going around to the right, or looking to their right and then cutting it to the left. The idea that we're trying to sell one thing and then strike to another place. So in that case, if I'm really showing that, oh, I'm going to send this Schielhau in to your left quadrant, and that's going to be the place that you need to defend, then that prepares you to respond there, opening up the other side. A very important aspect to be able, though, to do a good squinter with the face in this kind of situation is that you really need to practice your regular squinter and know what it looks like and feels like when you do it, so that when you're going to present that bluff to your opponent, they see what you're trying to show them, not what you're about to do, right? Tells that we don't realize that we have, and we all have them, every single thing we do ultimately is a tell, can be a bad thing. But if we can master our tells, understand, what it is that we're doing and how to make one action look like another, that's where some, a real kind of deceit of the body and the sword come from in our striking around. Now, I do want to say, guys, today that, that's kind of the main material that I have to go from here. If you do have questions, I see one just appeared right now that I'll get to in just a moment. Please let me know. I do have to cut things a little bit shorter today. It's a Sunday that I have to get a few things done on and running into time. But let me take this question first. Yeah, so... not a question, but a good comment I want to throw in there, that the Dagger Guy Gotland, if you haven't seen his videos, guys, go check him out on YouTube. He started out as a guy doing daggers. He's in Sweden, Meyer dagger in particular, and now is starting to get into the rest of Meyer's system. Highly recommend him. Check him out. But he had a statement that he thinks the Schielhau makes a lot more sense as an Oberhau in, the Meyer context, and and then changing to the short edge, like it seems you're doing here, than what he's been taught in the RDL earlier tradition. Yeah, and so I want to note, and actually I'm going to grab my copy of Meyer that I have sitting beside me, and in particular with the Schielhau, it's so easy to overlook. Meyer tells us specifically a couple of times that it's just a high cut, right? When he tells us the first time he introduces it in Chapter 4, the squinting cut is also a high cut. The Schielhau is a high cut. It is an Oberhau, but it's named, bit of a squint. So he there specifically is telling us that it is being done. There's also a second discussion that occurs that you can kind of get it as well. Where is it at? That's not the quote I want. But he numerous times explicitly tells us that the Oberhau and the Schielhau, right, are in a lot of ways the same way. And in particular, if we look at the idea that he does tell us that the 4 primary cuts that we've done, plus now the Schielhau as a short edge Oberhau, lets us understand all the rest of the cuts. That's at the end of Chapter 4, right before he goes into Chapter 5, where he's talking about that. And so it makes sense. It put things in context. And it works much better than trying to deliver it as a cut that's coming on a heavier angle. Yeah, so Peter had a question in YouTube. It's a good question. If you're going to be doing a Pell drill with the Schielhau, if all you have is, just a standard Pell that's up in the air, it's not the easiest thing in the world necessarily to do, since you don't have a lot of context. But if you do have one that has some shoulders on it, or it has a sword available to it, working a drill against that I really like, is kind of our targeting drill and making sure that we hit in there in time. So I might stand here against my Pell, strike in to get the blade out of the way, maybe not moving it quite that much. I really need to put a peg to stop it from moving quite so far, but getting that angle on so that then I can step in and strike high, or being able to strike down into flug so that we can get a nice thrust up through the throat. If you do have a partner, just as a targeting drill, one thing I like to have them set up, maybe you have a wife, a child, a husband, a friend that lives at home, a roommate, whatever, somebody that can hold a sword, just as a variable drill if you just want to practice targeting. I kind of like to have them hanging out with the sword in the middle, and then switch to one side or the other, whether it's just cocking the sword back and forth, whether it's moving into a guard if they know a little bit more, but giving you that stimulus to then attack into that opening, right? So if I'm hanging out here with the sword directly in front of me, and then I switch it to my right side, signaling that the Schielhau should be immediately brought in and attacking into that opening, or into that opening, right? And having that response. And something that can be done with a friend that just throws a mask on, you know, maybe if you need, throw a jacket for a little extra shoulder protection, but you should have the control to be able to drop it in there without injuring the person, and that can be a great way to go. Let's see. Yeah, so Dagger Guy Gotland once again. So all the other stuff that's often focused on with the Schielhau is basically just, you know, how you got there. Yeah, honestly, there's a lot of it that ends up being that I've ended up in the Schielhau, and then we can go from there. I kind of mentioned it in the video, but things like the changing through to defeat the Schielhau, and then the response to it. Now, in the early tradition, it's a little bit confusing because they kind of both imply that the changing through can be used against the Schielhau, but then the Schielhau defeats the changing through. Meyer's better at this and more explicit, where he tells us that anytime someone is fencing with shortened strikes, of which the Schielhau is one of them, because it's using the short edge, it's not coming forward quite as long, that someone might attempt to change through against it. And then in that kind of situation, we have to wind the long edge back out and turn into it, as I demonstrated in the video. And so that's one situation where, you know, kind of how we approach it and what we're going to come through it is going to be, hi, my dear. Excuse me a second. What's up? What's up? You want to pick up? Ugh, as always, my daughter wants to make appearances in videos because, you know, that's what they're going to do. But yeah, so once the swords cross and we find ourselves in that bind, short edge on, kind of, you know, dominating the situation where we can then turn it into a thrust or other attack, they can play out from there. But the real key for practicing it is, you know, delivering it from above as an Oberhau with the short edge being turned in. She didn't want to wear any pants today because it's getting warm in California, isn't it? Yeah. Am I missing any other questions? I don't think so. So hopefully, guys, that this has been useful for you today. I'll give it another moment or two. If there's any other questions, I'll happily get to them. Yep, one coming in right now. Yeah, so a question of, you know, after the strike, falling back and targeting the hand with the strike instead of, you know, going to the shoulder. Absolutely. When I talk about that shoulder line, guys, I'm implying a plane, maybe more than a line, that extends out through the hand and arm as well. So I could very easily target, you're going to go attack? Go attack. I could very easily choose to attack the hand or arm instead of the shoulder, neck, or head. It really depends on the variable measure that we're at on what the best target would be. So, for instance, using my Pell as an example, I might do that initial strike in, right? And once I'm in there, turn and attack the hand, and especially with a one-handed version of the Schielhau, if you're doing it in rapier, coming in and striking in and going to the hand or arm is awesome, right? It's really hard to continue to fight if there is a piece of metal through your forearm, or if you get your fingers cut off. That becomes difficult as well. So when I say the shoulder line, I'm implying everything along that line. So if I'm standing here with my sword out in front of me and you're striking down along this line, it could include my hand, it could include my arm, or the shoulder, depending on what target is going to be the most available to you. Yeah, excellent. I think that's it. Yeah, so hopefully, guys, this has been helpful to you today. As always, you know, we'll have another live stream next Sunday, and we have videos showing up throughout the week. If you have any questions, you know, hit us on Facebook. Let us know things that you might like us to talk about, and continue from there. And then, yeah, having some bugs on the mountain that need to be cleaned up. Yeah, you gonna climb up it? So yeah, let us know things you might be interested in. We'll happily cover them for you in either a video that's posted up during the week or in a future live stream video as well. But I'll give it another moment or two while I see the fascinating thing that my daughter is having. If you have any questions, throw them on there, and I'll get into them as well. Yes, we'll hose this down in a second. Okay. So another good question that came up from the Dagger guy in Gotland. Yes, this absolutely references the circular diagram. That is an ongoing project we have that is currently proving massively fascinating, and we're trying to figure out the best way to film that and kind of show off all of the various actions, paths, and implications of the diagram. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, it is the Rostock diagram I've shown in a previous video, where basically Meyer has a couple of concentric circles with intersecting lines. One thing that we have discovered that's very fascinating is that also the Fibonacci sequence and spirals derived from it play an important part in the diagram as well. So that is stuff that we will absolutely see show up. What I will say in particular to this question, in regards to the diagram, the point at which the intersection happens is then the starting point of paths for winding and binding that we'll hopefully demonstrate in the near future as we figure out the best way to get it filmed. All right. She doing good? Okay. Well, just don't drop her on her face. Yeah, good job, Cara. All right, guys. Otherwise, if we have any other questions, awesome. If not, it has been a pleasure talking with you today. Let me know in the future, like I said, anything else you want us to cover, and we'll happily go into it and demonstrate that as well. Next week, we'll be continuing on with the Meisterhau. We're going to basically move on to the next one in sequence from Meyer, which is going to be the Krumpau, especially considering that, as Meyer notes, the Schielhau is the Krumpau, and vice versa at times, or depending on how we want to look at it. So we'll be looking at that as well. We'll go into the Krumpau, ways to train it, actions related to it that we can work, and go from there. But otherwise, I think my daughter is about to get really mad at me. It has been a pleasure talking to you today, so I will see you next time. Bye-bye.